I need to move on to local storage. We have about 10 minutes left. Let's go talk about that. Let's go to my HTML file. Okay. You guys are going to be building a form like this. Okay. Mine's a very simple one. I've got input type equal text, ID player name, value player one. So the initial value is going to be player one. Okay. I need a drink. I'm about to faint. All right. Let's go ahead and run this one so you can see what I'm actually doing. So in this case, my initial value is player one. I'm going to change to player two, and I'm going to change this to 5, difficulty level 5. I'm going to click save, and then when I reload the page, my new values are there. Now that's not really sensical because usually when you load the page, it loads the previous values, which were 1 and 1. Okay. So what I've done here is when I click save, I'm actually saving this in a local storage, which is like a cookie on your browser. Cookies and local storage are on a per host basis. So local storage is about cookies only have like 64K or something like that in them. You can store like 10 megabytes or more in local storage. So if you want to store a lot of stuff, you can store it in local storage. And again, it's there as long as until the user actually clears the storage or clears the cookies on their browser. There's a function here called clear, which would clear the local storage, and I've actually reloaded the page. So let's go back to my code, and that'll be the last thing we cover. The last 8 minutes, we'll just cover talking about this. So let's go look at the JavaScript. That's not my red storage one. It's my regx. There we go. Okay, and I want my let's do that here. Okay. So here's my JavaScript. Hopefully you can see it. Let's just start at the top here. I'm using, so I haven't converted this to jQuery yet, so I'm just using add event listener load. And I'm grabbing player name and difficulty level by ID. I'm creating a little object here, which I'll explain in a second. Okay. But when the page loads, I've got this keyword here called local storage. If local storage dot get item and player name, okay, is true, then what that means is that player name has been stored in local storage, and I can now go and get the key that I stored and use it if I want. If it returns false, it just means that that key has never been set. So local storage is a key. It's like a JavaScript object. You can set it in the same ways. You can use get item and set item, or you can just use brackets, just like here. The only difference between local storage and a real JavaScript object is that you cannot store objects as a value. You can only store string key, string value. So you'll see here, I'm doing local storage get item player name. So again, I just stored his name there. Local storage get item difficulty level, and I'm setting the value of that of those inputs. Okay. If I were using an object, so we're kind of doing the same thing twice. Hang on a second here. There we go. But I'm doing one in an object. So in this case, I've stored an object with the player name and difficulty level, and so I go local storage stored object, and I have to JSON parse it, which means I need to turn it back into an object as I pull it out of local storage. Okay. Then I go store an object dot player name. Right, I just go ahead and assign the value of that input, the value in that object. Again, I can use the bracket syntax when accessing JavaScript objects. How did I save this? Well, when I clicked on the save button, first I added an event listener on that. All you do is you local storage, set item, player name, and then I go grab the value of the input. So I type in 5 or whatever. Now it's going to store 5 in local storage. Okay. Same thing for difficulty level. And now if I want to be clever and store it in an object, I can just use my object. Store an object, give it a key, and then throw the value in. Store an object, difficulty level, key, and value. But now, of course, I can't store an object, so I need to stringify that object when I stuff it into local storage. So I stuff it in local storage, so stored object, or dot stored object, JSON.stringify, store an object. Okay. Any questions so far? Let's see. I've got a question here. When would it be more beneficial to store it as an object rather than an item? Well, good question, Wyatt. If, for example, let's just go look at an object example real quick. Let's say I had an object like this. Okay. I wouldn't really want to break it up and store make, model, and year separately, would I? Right. So, in fact, I may actually have an array of these. Right. I might have multiple of them. And I want to store them all together. So obviously when you want to keep things encapsulated as objects, right? Yeah, encapsulating relative data, right? You want to do that. And again, I could take that array as well. I'm going to undo changes here. I can take that array, I can take an array of objects and stringify it and store it, and then pull an entire array of objects, entire database out of local storage if I so desire. Okay. The last thing is just clear. So I added a clear button, and I just did remove item player name, remove item difficulty level, and in this case, remove item stored object, where I stuck them all together. And I did something very handy here that probably something that could be useful to you at some point. If you ever want to reload the current page, you just say window.location.reload, and it will actually just reload the current page from scratch. In my case, I've cleared local storage. I reload the page, and then it goes back to this get here, and it fails because the keys aren't there anymore. And so then it just goes back to the default values, which I placed on the page in the first place, right here. Any other questions? Feel free to speak up if you want to. That's the topics I wanted to cover